Hey there guys, so I recently got this retired PC from some family members and it's one that I put together quite a few years ago now. This was a build that I made at the end of the 2017-2018 mining boom. There were so many parts that were pretty much just being given away that I was actually able to piece together a relatively competent PC here. We're talking an Intel G3900 Celeron CPU paired with an H110 Asus motherboard, at the time 8 GB of RAM, and an AMD RX 5600 4 GB. Now the graphics card was really not necessary in this at all when I pieced it together for the family member. They were never going to play any games or anything like that, but I got 5 of those graphics cards for pretty much $150, so I was throwing them onto pretty much any system that came my way, and I'd figured that eventually I'll see it again anyway. Now after replacing the faulty sticks of RAM that were in the system and replacing it with 16 GB, I decided to load up some games on here and see how it actually held up. Seeing as how this Celeron was a low-end dual-core processor in its heyday, I was very curious to see how it would actually hold up in some more modern titles that are still designed to run on low-end hardware. And so of course I immediately loaded up my favorite game to be absolutely terrible at, Valorant. And to no surprise, the CPU was pretty much being fully loaded at all times, and really the performance that we were getting was very brutal. The averages aren't too bad at 106, but the fact that the 1% lows are barely above single-digit ranges lets us know that this was actually a very brutal experience. It's very clear just from looking at the frame times and of course the CPU and the GPU usage here that we are pretty much completely CPU limited. Sometimes the GPU is not even being utilized because it has to wait on the CPU to catch up. So in general, this was a very rough experience and already showing some bad signs on how this is going to end up performing. So out of morbid curiosity, I actually loaded up CSGO just to see how it actually perform in this. And it was interesting to see that the CPU wasn't 100% being utilized here, though close to it. There was still some headroom left there. Now, of course, this is a bot match because to actually get the MSI overlay to work, I have to disable some of the online security protections. So a bot match is just easier to do. Overall, though, the performance that we were getting here was pretty brutal in the sense that we were not getting averages above 60, and this is with everything set to the lowest in-game graphics. And our 1% lows are pretty much at a range where it is going to be very uncomfortable for a lot of people to play. So in general, we are pretty much very limited here, and of course the GPU is exhibiting the same thing where it will drop its usage down, and it really just comes down to the fact that the CPU is just not able to keep up here. So wanting to continue the trend of testing out esports titles, I wanted to actually check out Rainbow Six Siege on here. Unfortunately, every time it was actually going to load into a game, it would just crash the desktop. And it was happening every time I tried with Vulkan, I tried with DirectX. Neither one of them would actually let it load, so it was a complete bust. So deciding to move away from the esports titles, I switched over to Monster Hunter Rise, which is a game that I have been playing a lot of, but I've found to actually run on pretty much anything, and this just shows that it pretty much runs on anything. 1% lows aren't incredible, but they're not bad either. They're staying well above 30. The frame times look consistent enough, and while our average isn't at 60, it's still high enough that it should be doable, especially if you're playing this with a controller. And I actually found myself having a decent time here. Now, it should be noted that this is running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and the lowest graphics settings actually drop the internal render resolution. So it's not as clear as it should be, but to get this level of performance, you kind of just need to use that. And overall, it looked decent enough that I could continue to play this game like this if I really needed to. So actually a very satisfying result, but I guess it's not too surprising considering that this game was designed to run on the Switch. Now, a game where it actually did decently enough, at least at the lowest graphics settings, is Skyrim Special Edition. Shouldn't be too surprising since Skyrim is old enough to have come out in the days where multi-core processors weren't exactly that necessary just to get a consistent gaming experience or just computing experience, because most things were still programmed to just load one core, with 2 at most. Now, the Special Edition does come with some enhancements, and the fact that it is 64-bit means that the system is actually able to utilize more more than the original base game, but here it's able to hold up decently enough. You'll see that the 1% lows are dropping to below 30, and there will be the occasional stutter here and there, but for a lot of the gameplay, it's very consistent. And if you're going through dungeons and stuff like that, you're actually going to get pretty decent levels of performance. So a welcome surprise for sure, but it is a title that at this point is getting old enough to almost start middle school. Now, with the success that I saw in Skyrim, I decided to actually try out another title that I thought it was going to have an easy time with, and that is Rocket League. And oh, how wrong I was. This is running at the lowest in-game graphics settings, and our 1% lows are pretty brutal. There are just these consistent lag spikes that happen throughout the gaming experience, and it really drags down the whole game. It's overall pretty brutal. And it's unfortunate because the averages that we're hitting are actually really decent, but it's really those 1% lows that kind of just drag down the whole experience. So it's really unfortunate to see. So after the disappointing results in Rocket League, I decided to load up a game that runs on a trusty old engine called the Source engine. That is Insurgency, the original Insurgency, not Sandstorm. Personally, I'm a bigger fan of the original game because it runs really well on almost any system, and with the mod support that the game actually has, there's a lot of content here. And playing through the game, I was getting decent enough performance, though nothing incredible. 1% lows that dip down into the 30s isn't exactly great, but it's more than doable, especially when your averages are well above 60. Now the CPU is getting pretty loaded up here, but it is not getting maxed out. So you will see that the GPU is essentially still being held back by the CPU. So I decided to also load up Left 4 Dead 2 to see how it actually performed on here since Insurgency did so well. We're getting around the same range of performance as we got in Insurgency, though the 1% lows were doing just slightly better. The CPU was pretty much reaching around the same level of utilization, and the GPU was actually giving the exact same results. So if you're a fan of actually playing some of these older Source engine titles, you can actually get some pretty decent performance with this Celeron, though it is definitely showing its age here with the fact that just playing a game like this is already utilizing a lot of it, but the temperatures that it's reaching are actually pretty nice. The system was extremely quiet, at least. Though the GPU that I have in there, I actually had to replace the fan on it years ago, and I just strapped on like an Arctic fan on it, and it's been holding up perfectly fine. The GPU temperatures look pretty solid, especially for a case that doesn't really have very decent airflow at all. So while it's not an amazing performer, it at least does provide you a quieter experience, at least until you play one of the games that's on the hard drive instead of the SSD. Then it just starts to scream at you. Now, after some pretty disappointing results in a lot of modern light games, I decided to hop on eBay and see what I can do to upgrade this system. After hunting around to see what kind of prices I could get for a nice little upgrade on here, it was a tough decision really between getting either a i5-6400 for around $30, an i5-6600K for the cheapest that I found at the time being around $40, or getting the i7-6700 for around $60. Thankfully, eBay helped out with the decision making there, where they gave me a $10 coupon for any purchase of over $30. So I pretty much ended up settling on an i5-6600K because I was actually able to send an offer and get it for $22 after coupon. Now, once I installed it on the system, I pretty much ended up loading in Valorant immediately to check out if there was actually any meaningful uplift here. And I mean, there is in terms of the averages, but the 1% lows actually did not see a noticeable bump. It was still a consistent stutter throughout the entirety of the gaming experience. And I'm almost curious if it's some other limitation at this point. It could be a RAM limitation, considering that because we're on a low-end motherboard, we're pretty much just stuck running this at the lowest 2133 speed the DDR4 can go to. If we were on a actually Z series motherboard, we could potentially pick up those 1% lows, but really I would have to get another motherboard to test that out. But in general, the level of performance was decent enough, but I was actually hoping for something a little bit better than this. It could also be that the game is not really optimized to run well on AMD. I would not be surprised if that's the case, though I'm not 100% sure. So I decided to switch over to Counter-Strike Global Offensive to check out if there was any uplift on that, and at least here there was actually a noticeable, meaningful uplift, where the 1% lows were now more than comfortably above 60, and our averages were at 110. So the gaming experience here is completely different, and this is vastly improved. And in general, this actually felt like a really nice combo. Though the CPU isn't really able to reach its full potential because it's, not able to be overclocked on this motherboard, it still has decent enough boost clocks by default that you get some really nice results, at least in this title. Which, to be fair with how old the 5600 is, at this point, I feel like this is about the limit of where you should realistically be using this GPU. I think the biggest benefit here was actually the fact that Rainbow Six Siege actually launched and let me load into the game, which was a welcome surprise considering that on the Celeron, it would not even load into the actual game. So already a major improvement, and this is of course running with Vulkan, and it is the lowest in-game graphics preset, which actually renders the game at a lower resolution and just uses temporal upscaling. But it gives us some buttery smooth levels of performance, and this actually felt absolutely incredible to play. So I was actually really happy to see this, considering that I essentially only paid $22 to turn this system into something that could realistically actually play games. Now, switching back to Monster Hunter Rise, this ended up being a completely different experience at this point, where our 1% lows were in the 90 range and our averages were at 100. At this point, we were pretty much just fully GPU limited. So if you look at the usage charts, it really seems like these two components really complement each other really well here. I don't think anything is just meaningfully being held back. And in a game like this, it is a perfect combo. And considering I had this hooked up to a 144Hz display, the increased level of performance really helped to make this feel extremely smooth to play. So I was extremely happy to see the result on this game. Another big winner is of course Rocket League, because now we were actually able to get some really nice levels of performance, to the point where you could realistically turn up the graphics settings at this point instead of keeping them at the lowest. I just did that just for the comparison's sake. But the result in the 1% lows here is just so drastically different that this is a whole completely different experience to try to play. It is so incredibly smooth and pairs so well with this 144Hz display in comparison to just having the Celeron in there. So I'd say if I was trying to just improve the performance in this game, this is $20 well spent. Of course, Insurgency also saw a nice little boost in performance, particularly in the 1% lows now being consistently above 60 and our averages being in the 100 range. Really nice experience to play overall. Not too much I could realistically complain about. I had a lot of fun playing like this. This is one of those games that I just play all of the time. So if I could get this level of performance, I'm more than happy. And last but not least, I did load up Left 4 Dead just to see if this also saw an uplift, and just like Insurgency, it had a nice bump in performance, particularly in the 1% lows, and the averages were looking really nice. At this point, it's the GPU that is limiting the experience here. And that's got me curious what kind of an upgrade I could actually end up doing to this system to turn it into a pretty decent gaming system. We're already $22 into upgrading this build. We might be able to squeeze in a little bit more money to see if we can't get a better GPU in here, or maybe even finding a motherboard to throw in here to actually boost the CPU clocks and actually run higher speed memory, because the kit in here actually is designed to go all the way up to 3200. It's just running at the stock JEDEC speed of 2133. Being a K-series CPU, that does mean that this does support memory overclocking. So I might actually just look into finding a cheap motherboard that will pair with this. I think it's Z170 and Z270 that support this. But anyways, I hope you guys found this video interesting. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.